Right. The other thing that comes up, and I find this to be, it's always interesting. I know, the law enforcement looking at this as a public safety concern instead of a public health concern is going to be looking at it, in a more prohibitive way. And there's always this assumption that cannabis plants can be grown real easy or it happens real fast. And and there's a lot of people, and I think we would agree that the law at a very minimum allows people to grow for themselves in their house, minimum number, 12 plants or less. But it's not always that easy. I hear, and even for that patient who is, even our attorney general would not dispute, the certification process. That when they get started, and become a patient, it's usually the need to have it now. And this not looking outside of the own 5, your specific 5, creates challenges to that because you're going to need to acquire immediately. Sometimes it takes 4 months, 5 months to grow the plant successfully, and all this could be while someone coming from chemotherapy has been throwing up in a bucket and can't keep any food down and has no So I mean I know, and I've had this debate, and I don't mean to sound contentious about it because I it's just the question comes up, and I always saw that 4E to be that extension for those situations that protected against that. And I'm always fascinated to hear people's interpretation of it. I appreciate that. But when you think about these bills, think about that really from that sick patient and that immediacy and the need now, and 4 months sometimes, and that's even if you know what you're doing. That's even if you are able to produce. I mean, I'm not a cannabis grower. The idea of me doing it for somebody, I'd be challenged by it. I watch a lot of video, but the idea of producing something I'm going to give to a loved sick one, I'm going to want some help. I'm going to want someone looking over my shoulder, and a lot of these, the way the courts have been interpreting these things have been not really contemplating these things as a public health issue. It's much more of a public safety.
A couple of things that I can note to you. I spoke briefly with Phil Cavanaugh today, and you might pursue this with him next week when he's on. He talked a little bit about having some of the bills refer to the Department of Community Health and making it more of a healthcare issue. And I think that's a good thought, where it's appropriate so that we can accentuate the medical marijuana side of this, the purpose that people voted for this bill, or not the bill, but the change to our Constitution. The other thing that I would point out to you is I'm very sympathetic to what you just said, and here's where it arose for me. When the bills went out, we tried to be very clear. These were starting points. We wanted to get some language out for people to respond to, and they have been. And whatever is going to pass will be very, very different than what was introduced. I had a woman call. She was from Oakland County, and I never did get her name. But judging from her voice, she sounded elderly, but that's a tough decision or call to make over the phone. But her point was this. She did not want to grow marijuana in her home, but it was helpful to her medical condition. And what she was struggling with is finding a legitimate caregiver. Because I think it would be difficult for anybody to say that there isn't some criminal element invading this space. Not all of it, but there's some. And she struggled and struggled to find somebody that would grow the plants on her behalf and then give her, and then going, Mike, to a comment you made, a consistent supply to treat her ailment. So what we've been trying to do is discuss, again, this goes back to the distribution model, is how do we define and create a distribution model that can assure a patient like that she has a legitimate caregiver or supplier and that there is a certainty in the availability of the product. I've visited a couple of dispensaries, and I've talked to some people that grow medical marijuana as caregivers, and am convinced, I'm no horticulturist, but I'm convinced that there's a real difficulty here. And so those are things that we need to address. They won't be in the first batch of bills that we take up, but Rep. Carlton, Mike Carlton, has agreed to work, be the point person on the distribution process so that we can address those very concerns.
Right, but just as a matter of discussion, and those are all things that and those things that, I think address much of what you're discussing in terms of, how to zone and, a distribution, something that, may involve, some direction on what to do with money and how it's transferred and where it's to be put and how it's going to be to taxes and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But, the existing law as it stands right now allows for transfers of, and, if there is an additional, connection outside of the 5, I think you eliminate a lot of the concerns that may be needed. Just, not even getting to the level and the sophistication that you may be, desiring to wrap yourself around to, control and understand all of that. I'm talking more just within the existing, law. If you look at it from a patient's perspective, immediate needs and, uninterrupted supply and usable material. These are all things that are contemplated within the Act, and are things that contemplate the patient's needs. So, I don't know. I don't know that if you're really looking at the patient community in terms of their needs for immediate medicine, that it even contemplates any other type of distribution method. The system does work. I mean, I don't think you disagree with that. Do you?
I think that the system works, but there's trouble within it. And one is a simple legal interpretation, whether or not a caregiver is limited to 5 patients. Secondarily, what do you do with excess growth if you have it? Those things need to be addressed, and I put them into the distribution system because I think there could be a better model of distribution. But I think what you just said is fair. Maybe looking that far down the road, it's worthy. It's something that we ought to spend some time on. But we might be overachieving. I mean, that's kind of what I inferred a little bit from your.
Do you see the existing caregiver model being the participant in supplying the distribution model? The points, or do you see it as being something else? Because that's also a hot topic, I think, in our community of wanting to know how how the legislature is viewing that.
We don't have any consistent approach yet, but I think having a caregiver model can be part of and should be a part of whatever future distribution model we might have, because there are parts that work quite well. For as many concerns that I've heard from people that say I have a wonderful relationship and it works and it's trouble-free, and so I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're just looking for ways to improve the situation.
Representative Walsh, I also wanted to just go back to your response on one of the previous questions really quickly. When you described the woman, the patient that was having trouble obtaining a caregiver, you said that she was having difficulty finding an adequate caregiver, and then you jumped straight to a criminal sort of element. And I'm not quite making that connection because
it was her connection, not mine.
Okay.
What her inference was, and I'm only repeating what she passed on. It wasn't something for I as a legislator or the legislature to investigate, but her inference was that she could not find, in her opinion, a legitimate caregiver, and it was her opinion that there were people selling drugs grown on her behalf to others.
Oakland County is a difficult community. There's a lot of different ways that, the community has been reacting to the way law enforcement's, and I'm sure you're aware that, Oakland County is kind of taking the lead in across the state as being, the
testing the protections of the law in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I don't know if that's. I don't mean that in a negative way. I just think it's kind of more fact because they've. But nevertheless, as opposed to, for example, Kim Worthy in Wayne County, who is not, there's no. I don't think there's any cases that they have that have been, precedent making from the Court of Appeals. But let us ask about this. I know that one of the bills that was proposed, which is the discussion of the doctors, and that bill was 54?
4851.
Yeah, 4851.
I'm sorry, right. Mm-hmm. And then just this last couple of weeks, the LARA, Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, provided or mailed out to all the physicians across the state, MDs and osteopathic physicians, this kind of proposed guidelines for the appropriate method of doing a medical marijuana certification. I'm sure you've seen this, right?
No, I have not. And what's I've heard of it, but I've not seen it. I'm sorry to report to you and to those that follow the show, the administration and the legislature is not always in sync. We might move legislation that they're not expecting, and they might do something on a regulatory level that we don't expect. So I've not seen it yet, but I do look forward to taking a look at it. Rep. Kavanaugh has the bill 4851, and they're continuing to work on it, but we ought to take into account what Lara has to think.
Right. It's kind of interesting because many in the community believe that these are issues that are medical issues. We talked about the not being public safety and public health, and this is the physicians, as I would argue, should have stepped forward. There's input from the licensing board, and they give some guidance. Nothing different than the way other physicians have been practicing medicine, and they even add a couple other things in there that make it a little bit more restrictive. And the question is, this to me, seems like a solution if the physicians are doing it. I mean, it seems to address much of the concerns. I think I even heard some of your on your website in reference to some of the Skype certifications and things like that they were going to try to clear up or clarify, and this seems to do that. My question is, this is a tool that exists without legislation. This is a tool that is arguably a solution to a perceived problem, short of legislation. If after you read this and this satisfied some of your concerns and some of the issues that you address in your bill, is this the type of thing that you would sign off on and feel no need to move forward with legislation? Right.
Yeah. If we are comfortable that there's good guidelines out there, we're not going to move forward with unnecessary legislation. And I'll give you an example. There is a bill that, let me see if I can find the notes on the one. It's still in the 4851 and the Kavanaugh bill. And there's some language in there that would address the issue of the enclosed, locked area. And the last input that I had from Rep. Horn and Rep. Kavanaugh is that they would prefer not to address that because they have concluded that the language is okay. And we have some additional, trying to see, look at their notes here. Some courts have already given some additional definition in the issues before the Supreme Court. So they're advocating that we perhaps not cover that in the bill, and we might take that out of the final package. So we're very flexible. I go back to the introduction date. We made it clear this is a beginning point, and we're not trying to pass laws just for the sake of getting a public act. If there's something out there that's adequate and legislators are comfortable, then my expectation is, at least at the committee level, we won't have any motivation to move things forward.